webinar for the love of weeds. We are from the Finchley Pollinator Project. I'm Shiri, and today's host is Deena J Kestenbaum, the one and the only. The Finchley Pollinator Project, we are a group of local volunteers, and we try to improve the local habitat for these wonderful beneficial insects in many different ways. And one of the things we do is that we got funding from the co-op, and we are paying local people to grow pollinator-friendly plants for us from seeds. And then what we do with all these plants, it's hundreds and hundreds of plants, we donate them to our local community centers, which include schools, GP surgeries and hospitals, community gardens, and the like of that. So if you are also a pollinator project, I think it's a worthwhile initiative. People get involved, they enjoy growing. And of course, the community centers are very happy to receive all these free plants. We also try to do in-person events, and we have quite a full program this spring and summer. And we also do webinars, and we're very, very lucky to have a local horticulturist and a Chelsea Award winner as well, Deena. And therefore, I'm just going to hand over to you, Deena. I'm going to share the screen as well.
Wonderful. Okay, well, welcome everybody. It is so nice to see so many names up on the screen. Some names I recognize, and to those I know, a very warm hello. And to those I don't recognize, also a very warm hello. So we are going to spend the next hour considering weeds. And as it says here on the first slide, really the unsung heroes of open spaces. And Shiri, let's just go to the first slide, please, so that people can actually look at a field full of what some might just dismiss as a bunch of weeds. We've got yarrow, we've got ragwort, we've got goldenrod in a field. So what I would like to do in this next short while together is really enable us to rethink our attitude and our relationship to what we are often referring to as weeds. We need to rethink them in terms of biodiversity, how they support wildlife, in terms of soil health, in terms of their medicinal properties, and not least, the aesthetics of them. So if I go back in time a little bit, let's think about how the word weed came into our vocabulary. It's actually an Old English word, predating Chaucer. I don't know how to pronounce this. It's W-E-O-D, maybe wood or something of that nature, but it means anything that grows abundantly, anything that exploits growing conditions, whether it's a field, an agricultural environment, a garden, or I think so impressively, little garden cracks and nooks and crannies, walls, pavements, brickwork. They've been following humans around since the Neolithic agricultural revolution about 12,000 years ago, when humanity started to differentiate between plant life that was beneficial to the maintenance of human cultivation and civilization, and those that actually compromised the ability to have very rich, nutrient-rich agrarian produce. So there began to become two kind of opposing camps. And interestingly, there are still two definitions in the modern world of what a weed actually is. There is a botanical definition, and that is the image that we're seeing here would fall into the botanical definition, which is any plant that pops up without any human intervention. In other words, they self-seed, right? There is no human hand involved in the dissemination of these seeds. They are predominantly dispersed through the activity of wind. So if you think about a dandelion, when the dandelion dies back and you have this dandelion clock, it's called, that children and also adults very much enjoy blowing, you get dispersed literally thousands of seeds that are held on these little parachute mechanisms. And wherever they drop, if it is in the slightest bit hospitable, in other words, there can be 17 grains of soil there, a small crack, and a drop of water, and away they go. They are happy. And actually, with this sudden change in weather and so many plants popping up everywhere, I've been so aware of seeing plants in just extraordinary places, you know, in cracks of what looks like quite impenetrable walls. A seed has found some tiny space that it can call home. And there's something so entrepreneurial about it, maybe exploitative, but terribly impressive and courageous about this ability to land somewhere that looks like nowhere and think, I can actually turn this into a home. So anyway, that is the first definition. And in this image here, the yellow flowers that you are seeing are ragwort. And ragwort, we'll come back to ragwort numerous times in this conversation, is really important because it is the food source for cinnabar moths, providing a lot of late season nectar. So if we could have a look at the next slide, please. So these are all the different kind of mechanisms of seed dispersal. You've got wind, as I was talking about. You have seeds that pop, that plants that pop seeds out. So one of them is Himalayan balsam, which you see if you're local. It's all along the banks of Dulles Brook. And actually, this is an alien import. And because they're seed dispersal is so effective, it actually does maneuver and outproduce the ability of native seeds to develop, because the seed pods, as they get mature, pop open and there is an explosion of literally millions of seeds. You then have seed pods that are carried on the fur of animals, that are either dropped by birds or pooed out by birds or carried away in water. So, you know, very many different ways that these seeds are managing to disperse and find new homes. And then if we go to the next slide, there is a oh, this is also plants popping out of cracks in the wall, which is just, this is something that's called ivy leaf toadflax, and it has these beautiful purple flowers. And I always think it's a shame that that comes in the category of a weed. I guess a lot of people don't appreciate their brick walls being taken over by roots that might kind of exacerbate cracks. But also, you know, if you look at it differently, they're really beautiful. So the next slide will show you what the horticultural definition is of a weed, and that is a plant that is growing in the wrong place. And actually, in the years that I was working as a garden designer, I came to someone's back garden, very expansive space, and in the middle of it was an oak tree. And they wanted me to remove the oak tree, which first of all, I couldn't because it had a protection order on it. And secondly, I wouldn't. But actually, this really defined in horticultural terms a weed. It was not wanted within the confines of somebody's garden. So that was a pretty instructive and an interesting encounter that left the client quite furious. Anyway, so weeds are often dismissed as just garden nuisances, something to be removed, especially for those people who are very enthusiastic about pristine lawns with stripes up and down. Unfortunately, they've had a bad rap over the years. These are really resilient plants. They provide essential food and shelter for pollinating insects, for birds, for a ton of other wildlife. They create thriving ecosystems. Um, they are really important in terms of soil health. They prevent erosion in areas that are quite deforested, where the soil is really at the mercy of weathering. And they have a lot of, they replenish the soil with vital nutrients. And then there is another aspect of weeds that through our kind of disassociation in a way with the natural world, we have lost that treasure trove of resources hidden in plain sight, which is the medicinal properties that are offered by what are termed as weeds, and the nutritional benefits also. So and if whoever is not muted yet, I'd really appreciate it if you could mute yourself. Thank you. So if we think about the historical content or the historical context of weeds, before the agricultural revolution, so prior to like around 1820, weeds were really not considered a major threat either to productivity or to the kind of order of an outside space. They were gathered, they were exploited for their culinary and medicinal uses, and their common names actually represent that. And if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so we've got chickweed, which is unsurprisingly was fed to young chickens, very nutritional. We've got the next one, please, Shiri, if you don't mind, sow thistle, that was fed to lactating pigs and rabbits. There is another one called Good King Henry, which actually has nothing to do with the English King Henry, but comes from the German, and it differentiates between two very similar plants in this family. One was referred to as Guter Heinrich, the good Henry, and the other was referred to, the poisonous one, as Böser Heinrich. And somehow it's metamorphosized into English as Good King Henry, which I think is rather fab. And that was used as a cough remedy for sheep. But they also contain high levels of vitamin B and C, are really helpful in countering anemia. They've got high levels of zinc and iron in a lot of these plants. And I think there is a bit of a move now to, amongst some circles of people, to kind of reconnect with what weeds can offer. And again, as an aside, for anybody who lives in the Finchley area, let me just alert you to the fact that all along Dollis Brook, in the millions and trillions, is wild garlic, which if you gather before it flowers now, you can use it as a substitute for spinach. You can turn it into pesto. I've just tried for the first time fermenting some, and I can let you know how that comes out. And it's there to be harvested. So it's about kind of maybe getting a book, looking up common species, seeing what you can do with it. And again, could I ask whoever isn't muted to please mute themselves, because I'm just getting feedback. Thank you. So yeah, you know, there's a great book that I have here called Jekka McVicker's Herbs, and she has all the weeds you can imagine that are common to find here in London, and gives both culinary and medicinal uses for it. And there's something that's really thrilling about going back to what our, maybe not our parents were doing, but certainly some of our grandparents were doing. Although I can tell you, my Germanic grandparents weren't going anywhere collecting any weeds, but maybe somebody else's grandparents were. So there are, if we go to the next slide, please. So we've got lots of great weeds that are good for nutrient cycling. Things like dandelions with very long tap roots are bringing up nutrients and minerals from subsoil levels, which are much rockier strata, like 3 or 4 horizons down, which cultivated plants really don't have those sort of robust roots to get down there. And they also help aerate the soil in the same way that worm activity does as well. So what we're looking at now is a wonderful plant called Creeping Charlie. And why it's called Creeping Charlie, I can't imagine. But it's in the mint family, and it's very good at breaking up compacted soil. So particularly in terms, let's say, of a back garden after you've had building work done, or moving into a new apartment or a new house. Builders very often dump rubble into the back garden and then cover it with topsoil and a bit of grass, and it all looks delightful. And about 6 months later, everything dies because the roots can't get into the compacted soil. And this is where the weed family are going to do the job for you. Again, can I ask you, please, everybody, to mute themselves, because it kind of slightly freaks me out when I'm getting feedback from people's little squares. So thank you. So yeah, so the roots go really deep into the soil, and they manage somehow to bring the minerals and the nutrients back onto the soil surface. When it dies or it's cut back, it decomposes very quickly. So that's again enriching the soil with organic matter. And if anybody missed the soil science webinar that I gave last week, that I think is recorded. So if I'm using terminology that's not familiar, just use Google or watch me talking for another hour about soil science. Google is a bit faster than me. So let's talk about dandelions. If we can go to the next slide, please. And they are absolutely everywhere. I mean, they're popping up all over the place. I look at these cheery, yellow, jolly faces and just feel they're so optimistic. There's something that is just so trumpeting about spring about them. And again, they are incredible plants in terms of releasing nutrients into the soil when they're dyed or they're mown back. They're one of the first flowering plants to pop up as the soil warms up and the sun shines a little bit. And so they are offering really important resources to in terms of nectar and pollen, to honeybees and bumblebees. The queens, as they are staggering out of hibernation, they've got, you know, very, very low energy levels. And if they can just stagger on to an open dandelion flower, first of all, that flat surface is easy. It's a good landing pad. And secondly, it's offering them their first meal after having been dormant for about 5 months or so. So again, that's something to think about before you eradicate every last dandelion in your garden. Obviously, there needs to be a kind of happy medium. I'm not suggesting that, you just abandon all your cultivated flowers and grass, and let it turn into a sort of weedy mass. But it's about kind of thinking more judiciously, before you remove certain weeds, self-seeded plants. And actually, I noticed that the RHS are now developing a kind of robust weed lawn, for Chelsea this summer. And it's really worth watching how they are developing that, because I'm sure that's going to be marketed, um, most likely as turf. So if anybody is about to returf their garden and it's a kind of thing that interests them, look out for that, because the byproduct of that is that the biodiversity that you're going to be generating in your garden will be immense. And then the last slide in this little subject that I'm talking about, is nettle leaves. Now, again, nettles, I think, I understand that people are wary of them, and certainly in a garden, if you've got children, they're very stingy. It's a very unpleasant experience to brush by them and get these kind of urticaria, rashes up and down your hands and legs. But again, if you can find a corner in your garden that you can protect your children from, they are fabulous in terms of, again, what they are offering to early pollinators. And this, you can see a little tortoiseshell caterpillar that will turn into a butterfly. The small tortoiseshell butterfly, before it finishes its life cycle at the end of the summer, lays a lot of its eggs on the underside of the nettle. And then when these eggs hatch into larvae, that is the first meal that they will have. So again, there is this symbiosis between self-seeded plants, what is historically in the last 20th and 21st century been considered to be unwanted invaders of the garden space. There is space to kind of coexist, I am suggesting. The other fab thing about nettles is that it makes a brilliant liquid fertilizer. And the way you make that is, with gloves, gather the leaves, put them into a bucket, cover the bucket with water, cover the bucket then with a stone or something, and situate it as far away as you can from your home, because within 3 weeks, as the leaves break down, they will be creating an unbelievably nutritious kind of soup, and the smell could flay an elephant. It has to be smelt to be believed. And then what you will do is you will decant small amounts of it, add much more water, and then use that to water your plants, and you will see what a difference it will make. It is absolutely brimming with nutrients. So what has happened from the Industrial Revolution, and particularly during the 20th century, is that culture began to dominate nature. And when I say culture, I don't mean opera and art. What I do mean is cultivation, is the expansion of agriculture. And with the expansion of agriculture and the introduction of industrially produced chemicals, our link to the land, to the earth, to the soil, to plants, to this very personal relationship that really characterized most people's lives until the Industrial Revolution, was that, you had a headache, you had a sore, a sore throat, you injured yourself, the woman of the household would go out into the cottage garden or to go out into the field and gather the appropriate plant to create a remedy. Now, of course, some of those remedies were unuseful. The other word that came to me is ludicrous, but that doesn't feel historically quite appropriate word. But a lot of it really was based in hundreds of years of knowledge that was passed down from generally woman to woman, and is also to this day exploited by big pharma, so that you probably know, or you may know, something like aspirin is one of the components of aspirin is willow, and that was from time immemorial gathered and create and turned into a kind of compound to deal with aches and pains in the body and headaches. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So in the 20th century, we really did lose connection with the land, with the domination of agribusiness, of agriculture, of huge corporations dominating and controlling the seed market. There was a new ethos that was marketed to the home gardener by profit-driven industries. And that ethos kind of linked in with a post-war look. So if you think about the new look of Dior, very clean lines, right? I don't know if anybody saw the Dior exhibition at the V&A some while ago. It's dominated by shorter skirts, very tailored, very clean lines. And this is the sort of thing that was also imported, that ethos, that aesthetic, into people's gardens. So that you had the domination of humankind over nature, over plant life. And I guess from the beginning of time, if you think about, the Garden of Eden story, that already set in motion the domination of humanity over every other beast, insect, and certainly plants. So that if you think back to the 70s garden, 60s garden, this is a very typical 50s garden, there was nothing in that garden that had not been put in there by the activity generally of a man. Women tended to pluck plants and make flower arrangements in the 50s. They were not out in the garden, but I'm going into sociology, which is beside the point. And the way that you create a look like this is a gigantic use of pesticides and herbicides that are killing off every last bug, insect, worm, disease, yeah, sure, fungus. And the knock-on effect is that you had beginning to have, and we see it now, plummeting populations of birds, of butterflies, of insects, because firstly, they're poisoned, and secondly, their habitats are being gigantically eroded. So I guess the challenge today for those of us who still like a good looking lawn, and a good looking lawn, this sward of green, which is not punctuated by anything else, not dandelions, not clover, not daisies, not speedwell. This is difficult to do without pesticides and, well, herbicides. So herbicides are a poison that you pour onto plants that you don't want, and it kills those specific plants. You can also dig them up. It's backbreaking work. And I guess because I don't like a pristine lawn, I actually don't like lawn very much at all. It's a sort of monoculture that's very high maintenance, but it is great when you have young children, that's for sure, is can you find a kind of accommodation with those self-seeded plants and get to love a lawn that is more jeweled looking, that has got lots of different colors, that has got a lot of different plant life. And maybe it's about mowing less frequently, allowing strips in your garden to be unmowed for a while, and be curious about what is coming up there. What does an unmowed or a less mowed garden look like? And approach it from a citizen science point of view, and just out of curiosity, see if you do have more insects in those areas where you have got a greater diversity of self-seeded plants. More insects means more birds, more animal life. You know, we talk about the whole food web, which starts either right from the top, the greatest predator, which is us, or the tiniest bacteria that is feeding the next little layer. And again, I would refer you back to soil science. Um, it's just what we're doing to our landscape now is kind of terrifying. It's kind of terrifying. And again, there needs to be a new conversation with how how do we treat our land? And certainly in terms of agriculture, look, there are 7 billion people on this earth. Everybody needs feeding. Agriculture is under pressure to provide this. And but there are beginnings of a new way of doing it, regenerative agriculture, which is using fewer pesticides, which is changing the way the soil is related to. Because once you have exhausted the soil and it's not supporting plant life anymore, you've got a problem, because it takes decades to actually enrich the soil again. Okay, so perhaps, as I said, there is a new relationship to be forged with these plants that used to be dismissed as simply weeds. And if we could have the next slide, please. So yarrow, we saw yarrow in the first slide in that image of a field. Yarrow is one of the plants that, if you don't mow your garden, your lawn, will pop up really quickly. It's I think it's beautiful actually, but you know, beauty is very much in the eye of the beholder. So I will talk about it less from the aesthetics and more in terms of what it is providing for biodiversity. So flat, like the dandelion, it's got a flat landing platform for ladybirds, for lacewings, for parasitic wasps, for beetles. Now, lacewings and ladybirds are voracious eaters of aphids. Aphids are those clusters of weeny little green fly that you see up and down the stems of lush herbaceous perennials that are sap suckers. And left to their own devices, they basically will sap the living daylights out of your plants. How do you manage that? One of the ways of doing it is spraying it with pesticide. Another way is just taking a damp tissue and just wiping the stems off and removing the aphids. Another way of dealing with it, which is harnessing the biodiversity in your garden. It's called it's the biological approach to dealing with pests, is introduce as many ladybirds as you can to your garden, because they will have continuous buffets on these aphids and reduce them to a manageable proportion. And wildly enough, you can actually even buy little cotton bags of ladybird larvae that you can hang about in your garden, and the larvae will hatch into ladybirds, and then you have ladybirds dotted around all over the place, which we've done in gardens that I've worked in the past, wildlife gardens, and works very effectively in introducing the first generation of ladybirds. So parasitic wasps, you want them in your garden, again, to maintain a healthy kind of balance, because this is going to sound pretty gross, but what they do is they lay their eggs within the body of caterpillars. The larvae consume the caterpillars, they hatch out into the caterpillar's body and then consume the caterpillars from inside out. And in so doing, keep down their numbers. So we're not, it's not going to eradicate every last caterpillar of, let's say, the cabbage white, which feeds on brassicas, but it will keep things down so that you've got a kind of biodiverse balance in the garden. The image that we looked at before, this pristine garden, there is no biodiversity there, and the balance has been completely upended to favor the human aesthetic. But as I say, you won't hear any buzzing, you won't see any single insect or bird for that matter in that garden. We could go to the next slide, please. So this lovely little kind of, it's in the snapdragon family. This is bird's foot trefoil. Trefoil refers to the 3 petals that make up this flower, and it is the only food source for the common blue butterfly. If anybody has received notification through our newsletter, you will know that there is going to be a butterfly walk in June through Long Lane pastures, and one of the butterflies that are very common there is the common blue, because there is just a wealth of bird's foot trefoil that has been allowed to grow there. So their leaves feed caterpillars, and come autumn, their seed is also very much loved by wild birds. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Teasels. Teasels are fabulous. They're very tall, very architectural, structural. They are interesting in terms of their life cycle. They're biannuals. So you've got a whole category of plants that are called perennials, which means they come back year on year on year, die back in the first frosts. You don't see anything on the surface of the soil, but their roots are dormant. And as the soil warms up again in the spring, you will see the first shoots coming up again, and eventually flowers, and the whole life cycle starts again. You've got a whole category of annuals that flower, set seed, die back, and that's it. They are done. And then you've got these very interesting category in the middle called biannuals, which have a 2-year life cycle. And what is kind of fascinating about this is that there is no scientific explanation that has come to light yet as to why some plants are biannuals. And their life cycle is that in the first year, they will set out a rosette of leaves. So teasel is one of them, hollyhocks are one of them, honesty is another one. And in the second year, they develop stems, flower, and then die back. Now, teasels, I know, Shiri, you had a fantastic array of teasels in your garden this past year, and loads of finches in your garden feeding on teasel plants. It's just, I mean, watching these beautiful birds in your backyard is something really special. I highly recommend you finding a few teasel seeds, throwing them around, and see what happens. So we talked about how weeds are really useful for medicinal purposes. They can be aesthetically very attractive, how absolutely integral they are to plant to animal life, to insect life, but they are also really important as a pioneer species. And a pioneer species is a plant that is the first to occupy a devastated environment. So whether it is a devastated environment through erosion, through the complete degradation of land through overuse of farming, whether it's due to fire or any other kind of catastrophe, war is a very prescient one. They are the first to colonize a barren ecosystem. And once they arrive, their activity is kind of like the welcoming committee. Because they're incredibly hardy, they're very resilient, they can cope with an awful lot of quite adverse weather conditions and ground conditions. They don't need a great deal of sunlight. They can photosynthesize with a very, very little amount of sun. And just for those you may not know what that means, it's the photosynthesis process is this magical chemical process whereby the green chlorophylls in the leaves of plants are harnessing the energy of the sun. They extract carbon dioxide from the air and take up water from their roots and turn that into starches and sugars that keep them fed. So these hardy species, again, how do they get there? They get there through seed dispersal, through birds dropping them, through animals pooing them out. And because their roots, they tend to have tap roots, these long carrot type of roots, or anyways, very, very robust roots, they are able to make their way through the minute cracks in the soil and start to break up the soil, which allows later species to arrive, because what they're doing, what they're accomplishing is soil stabilization. As they die back, they're introducing nutrients into the soil. They are reducing wind exposure, moderating temperature in areas that are very exposed, reducing light in areas that are kind of blasted by the sun. And as I said, they are the first ones that will occupy a barren area that will then enable second kind of generation plants to make their way into that environment. So one of the important things also about these pioneer plants is that they produce a enormous volume of seeds that are with high dispersal rates. And because there won't be any insects in these blasted environments, they are they're disseminated through wind. So they're wind pollinated, and they're also able to survive long dormancy periods. So you can have environments that have been devastated, for example, by forest fire. And once the fire has died out, that a lot of these seeds that have been dormant in the subsoil will start to develop. So the next fabulous aspect or characteristic of weed species is companion plants and pest controls. And companion plants are those plants that you would put in with other plants that you particularly want to thrive, not just survive, but thrive. Often this is a term that is used in vegetable growing. So for example, you have a double act of rows of onions planted in between rows of carrots. The odor, the very strong odor of onion repels the carrot fly, kind of bamboozles the carrot fly, which is trying to hone in to the scent of into the carrot, but actually is kind of knocked out by the onions. You have nasturtiums that are planted around beans. Aphids absolutely adore beans, but they do adore nasturtiums as well. So these companion plants are a bit sacrificial in that they will give up their lives by being decimated by aphids. And then your wanted plant, which in this case are beans, will be spared from the devastation of aphids. Garlic mustard, which is popping up now all over the place. And again, if you walk along Dollis Brook, but not only there, I mean, I'm just very familiar with that area, it's popping up everywhere. It really smells of garlic. If you rub the leaves between your fingers, even though it doesn't look anything like the garlic plant, it smells of it. And again, slugs and caterpillars really dislike that scent, and it also inhibits fungal diseases and bacterial diseases on the plants that you really are wanting to protect. And again, this is really fabulous if you've got either in your own garden raised beds for vegetables, or you've got an allotment or any kind of space where you're growing vegetables. It's really worth paying some attention to companion plants. The next one, the next image, please, is tansy. They're so cute, these tansy. They're like little buttons, these flowers. And again, it's a hardy weed, often used for pest control. It has a very strong odor. I know people who hate it. I personally love it, but it repels ants, mosquitoes, flea beetles, and it's really good at deterring fungal diseases as well. It's also quite useful to have in a greenhouse. In a greenhouse, because it's you've got quite humid environment there. That's great for little seedlings and more delicate plants like tomatoes and cucumbers or aubergine. But of course, that is exactly the environment that fungal diseases thrive on as well. So it's worth putting in either into the soil of your greenhouse or into pots, some pots of tansy, and use that as a disease repellent. So if we could have the next one, please. I think that, yeah, that brings us to the end of the image. So if I would kind of encapsulate what I wanted to impart to everybody is, let's rehabilitate the image of weeds. And if we stop regarding them as invaders and understand their role as ecologically really beneficial, environmentally really beneficial, how important they are in stabilizing in soil, in adding nutrients to the soil, in providing pollen and nectar for really important insects. Perhaps we can cultivate a bit of a new appreciation for them, a bit more respect for them. Perhaps one can find a way of shifting gardening practices so that useful weeds, those weeds that you know are going to be supporting wildlife and also look pretty, don't necessarily need to be entirely removed. They create a healthier, more resilient environment. So let's look at them as allies rather than enemies. And that is where I'm going to finish this particular very long chat about weeds. If anybody got any questions, I will endeavor to answer them, but I may not be able to.
Thank you so much, Deena, and I love your the summary. Let's look at weeds as allies. I mean, I think it really brings everything incredibly in a very apt and succinct way, because they are allies. And I like the idea of, maybe if you don't like where your weeds are and you do want them you know, if it makes sense to then pot them up and move them about a little bit. I'm going to do that with the nettles, because really I've heard so much how they're so beneficial. They're so good for butterflies as well. So I'm just gonna, I feel quite lucky that I have about like 5 maybe popping up, and I'm going to try and put them in. Maybe that's the first questions. Do you think I can put nettle in pots?
Yeah, I think that is an absolutely brilliant idea, actually. And again, in terms of, you know, protecting your children, it means that you can actually place them higher up, perhaps on shelves, so that they're, you know, they're adding to your biodiversity, but they're not going to make your children cry.
That's a really good idea. So I'm going to look at the questions. So you got a lot of thanks and well deserved, of course. Someone is asking whether wild garlic is a weed.
Well, again, it's a weed in the sense that it comes from bulbs. It comes from, but these are rhizomes, actually, more accurately, that spread like mad. So yes, I would say that it's probably a weed. And interestingly, I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago at the Hampstead Gardens Suburb Horticultural Society, and somebody was saying that it's completely overtaken their garden and they just don't know how to get rid of it except for digging it out madly. So yes, I would say that it comes very neatly into the category of a weed.
Yeah, and I'd love, Dina, if we walked together and harvested some for pesto. Um, Someone asked whether marigolds are good companions for growing tomatoes.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And again, it's because the scent of the marigold leaves deter all sorts of insects. And again, they have some kind of fungicidal benefit in that they will deter tomato blight and also look gorgeous.
Hmm.
And it's one of these things that it's always worth trying. You know, gardening is all about experimentation and try it and see what happens, and it might work.
Absolutely. And then someone asked how to, Susanna asked how to ferment nettle. So if you, I don't know if you mean by fermenting, because we did talk about how to make the fertilizer. But do you think, Dina, that
I was
Susanna?
talking about fermenting garlic leaves. I've gotten massively into fermenting, and I think Anita, who's on this webinar, knows that she gave me my first SCOBY to make kombucha. So I found a recipe whereby you obviously you have to wash the nettle leaves really well. But then you chop them up, add some toasted hazelnuts if you like that, chop it up fine, put it into a kilner jar, and then add so for every 100 grams of leaf, and you add 1 gram of salt, and then top it up with water and just airtight and then put some leaves on top of it. Make sure that it's covered with water so that it doesn't go moldy. And within about a week or so, you should have very interesting fermented pesto. So I'm on day 4. We'll see what happens over the weekend.
I just love that you have an answer for that on the top of your head. You're the
Well, it's because I
fermenting
just
queen
did
on
it.
top of everything else. That's amazing. Yeah, I don't, did I miss any questions? I don't see. Someone asked whether we can have a copy of the recording. So I guess that's a question for me. Usually quite quickly we upload the recording to our YouTube channel. We feel so cool to have a YouTube channel. This will be our 11th webinar that we upload there. And then what we do is we send a link to that to anyone who registered. So usually within 2 days or so, you will get a link to the YouTube channel and specifically to this webinar, and take your time and explore our other webinars if you have a minute. Let's see. Someone asked about the pollinator walk in June. So that was just sent in our newsletter. I will send the link to the newsletter in the same email. I believe it's 29th of June.
Yeah.
29th of June in Long Lane Pasture N3 and between 12 to 2 p.m. And we are joined by the local branch of Butterfly Conservation, which is Middlesex and Hertfordshire. Yeah, I think it will be the chair who will lead the walk. So it's a butterfly ID walk. Let's see if we have any other questions. No. Last chance, everyone, to ask Deena. Any question? Well, Deena, do you want to say something to sum it up?
Yeah. So I would like to just say, you don't have to remember a single thing that I talked about. You can pick up the recording. There's so many books that will give you the information. There's a whole internet world that will give you all this information. What I hope that you will go away with is a sense of wonderment about the world in which we live, and a kind of humility in the sense that we are not just the arch predator, but we have responsibility towards everything else in the food chain that comes beneath us. And I would just urge everybody to go out and have a look at weeds and admire them. They are so resilient and so impressive. I think we can model our lives on weeds.
I absolutely love that. That is very inspiring. So thank you everyone for joining us, whether you're from Finchley, apparently New Zealand, Scotland, and some more faraway places. Thank you very much for joining us. It's lovely to have you, and we wish you a very pleasant evening. And take good care.
Is it just a quick question, please, before you go? Sorry. Is there a particular app that you can use to recognize these weeds?
Oh, that's such a good question. There are a lot of apps, but I've got one. Hang on, what is it called? Picture This. Picture This. It's £24 a year, and you just point the camera onto any plant, take a picture, and it'll identify it for you. It's so it's the best £24 to spend.
Oh, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's brilliant.
I think another good one is iNaturalist. So it helps to identify both plants as well as any sort of wildlife, insects, etc. And iNaturalist is very useful for the user because you can identify whatever you want, but it also helps collects data for scientists as well. So it helps scientists understand the type of plants and animals that can be found in different regions of the world. So it sort of like serves that double purpose. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, everybody.